this is Snarist again, and I'm back with my Ninja Gaiden 4 Master Ninja Difficulty walkthrough with Yakumo. This is Chapter 9, Realm of Silent Dead. And while I do like this chapter a bit more than the last one, I was very upset last night to see that it's about the same length, because this is another mission I don't really like. And that's funny saying that too, because once you get to a certain point, pretty early on, there's about 4 or 5 other different places you can go to in this level, because you can cross the waters and you can go off to these different sections to fight all these different enemies, collecting loot, finding other stuff. But it's just that certain sections like this where you're stuck in fights that you have to finish before you move on, they go on for a very long time. And then of course at the end of it, it's got one of my least favourite bosses in the entire game, which I don't know the pronunciation of, but you've probably heard me say it a couple times. I want to say Veilotl, or at least that's what I'm going to call him. And, well, he's got a pretty funny and goofy execution, you know, just turning into a pink or purple skeleton. Yeah, ultimately I don't like him. Not just because he spams his special attacks where you can interrupt with bloodbind attacks, but just in general, I don't like how aggressive he is. His hitboxes are awkward. And just like what Cetus is going to do in the next chapter, he will also summon enemies which can steal your lock on, and because the environments look the same, and they're always brightly coloured and have the same sort of colours, like this blue here, it's difficult sometimes to spot them, especially when the boss takes your lock on and the camera's always pulled out so you can see them, but that doesn't always mean that the enemies are going to be so kind. So if you see what I just did there as well, I'm not sure if I talked about this too much. If you can dodge an attack from an enemy like this, and you see the red orbs lying everywhere, make sure you hold down triangle so that by the time you land back on your feet, you'll charge an ultimate attack immediately and just let it go. And because it came off of a counter, you'll usually take some of the bigger enemies and they'll lose a limb and you'll be able to do an obliteration kill on them. So at this point in the walkthrough, while not every enemy has been introduced and I haven't done explaining all the tech and everything, all the basics are here. You know, so far, you've had more than enough time to hone your tech, and all that's left is just to put it to good use. If you've got bloodbind, make sure you use it. Keep one in reserve just in case you need to get yourself out of a sticky situation by standing on your sword like a polearm and setting yourself up higher, just so you can get away from the danger. And this is where it starts to open up. So generally you just have to go straight forward, or in some cases around those islands. Go underneath here. As I smack myself into the wall there. See, I don't mind the overall aesthetic of this place. It's just that, again, these missions I feel like go on way too long and they're just not very interesting, what's actually in them. The content of the level isn't very interesting, whereas the aesthetics and design is really, really good. And I mentioned before that I went through Steam and I managed to get my hands on Dead Space 2, and that's a walkthrough I want to do a couple things for. So the first one I think I'll do is a Zealot difficulty walkthrough, which is the hardest difficulty there is. Now one could arguably assume that hardcore difficulty is the hardest in that game, and I still remember when people talked about Dead Space 2's hardcore difficulty mode as one of the hardest difficulty modes there was, and it really isn't. Like, this was a few years ago or so, maybe 4, but I played Dead Space 2 hardcore for the first time because I was deathly afraid of, you know, failing and everything. So one afternoon when I was bored, I just decided to chuck off my PS3, put Dead Space 2 on and give it a shot. And what I found after a few hours is that I'd made it to the earliest parts of Chapter 10 without saving so far. I'm like, you know what, I could probably do this. And so then I played for a little bit longer for a few more chapters, and then I saved again. And while the worst of the fights wasn't behind me, at least I knew how to deal with those. And then I made another save right before the eye surgery section, because if you know anything about Dead Space 2 or you played it before, that eye surgery scene always just makes me cringe. It's hard for me to look at and take seriously, and I'm always nervous because one little slip up near the end and it can cost you your life. But yeah, having the last save I make before then is always fine. Because something I don't really like about permadeath modes is just the idea that you're on an on-rail section or you're stuck in a special sequence and you make one tiny little mistake that has nothing to do with gameplay or skill and you can get killed and that just loses everything for you. And there's a lot of different environmental ways that you can die in Dead Space 2. It's almost unfair. But I guess it's kind of the point, isn't it? So I'll be doing a walkthrough for those two aspects of Dead Space 2. What I did notice as well, that when going through the settings, I still need to play around with it a bit more, but I'm pretty sure if I want to have a higher resolution and a higher frame rate with Dead Space 2, I probably need to install a mod for it. I don't think I will, I'll just play it as it is, because the resolution I think is stuck at 720, and it may not be 60 frames, or at least maybe when I'm going through my recording, it will save it at 60 frames. It would be nice if it could do that for me, because I played Dead Space 2 exactly how it looks here on PC pretty much all my life, or at least as much as I've known it. And I really don't mind the way that it looks. I know some people probably will, but you know, this is just me. Whenever something involving tech takes way too long to figure out, or whenever I get to something that requires a lot of thought, a lot of concentration, and whether it's the case of installing mods or learning how to use this sort of software, if it becomes too much for me, I just stop. And if things become what I feel unnecessarily complicated, I kind of look at it like witchcraft, and I don't want to interact with it. Like I'm very archaic in the way I behave. It's like, does it work? Yeah, it works. Fuck it, I'll just use that. So while it doesn't work the best when it comes to being professional like this, I don't want this to get too professional. I kind of like when some games just have the old school jank or the old school looks to them, because it's more about style rather than cleanliness. It's, I think, a game that you wouldn't expect me to really compare it to in terms of how gruff something looks versus how good something looks is The Last of Us, because there's several different versions of them. You've got the original on PS3, you have the remaster on PS4, and you've got the remake on PS5 and PC. Personally, as far as how the game functions in the story and in the DLC, I think the remake is the best. In terms of the overall package, the remaster is the best because it's got the multiplayer as well, and the multiplayer is actually a lot of fun. The original is still good, but in my opinion, the higher frame rate of the remake and the remaster just make it superior in my eyes overall. But I won't lie, when you get into a fist fight or when the gunfights against the bandits and everything get rather hectic, having that slightly lower frame rate, it adds a certain sort of visceralness to it. Like the punches feel like they're being wound up. It just hits a lot harder, it's more brutal. And I noticed as well that with how soft some of the graphics can look on the PS3 version and how much the sun shines through, if that makes any sense, because you know, you got sunshine and certain effects and everything that involve brightness that are enhanced, but on the remaster and the remake, everything is kind of dulled down a little bit. It's more detailed and it's sharper looking, but it's just not quite as bright. And again, it just goes back to the whole art style matters more to me than graphical quality. That's why Ghost of Tsushima to me is still one of the best looking games ever made, because if you look closely at the facial expressions and some of the models, they have a cool couple of quirks here and there, like sweat running down foreheads and everything. It's got some pretty unique stuff, but ultimately the graphics aren't really anything to speak of because again, it's an open world game. It's, you know, it's got to compensate for a lot of different things happening at once. But the art style is just incredible, especially in its environments, the different trees, the hills, the wind, particle effects, without being too nauseating or too infectious, which is a big part of why a lot of anime games, despite how much I like them, fail for me, because they insist on just having an abundance of all these different particle effects, preferring style over substance. And style is definitely important, but yeah, when you can't see what's happening and it's all just a light show in front of your face, it's pretty to look at, but you kind of need to concentrate. You need to see what's going on. And that's kind of relevant to when I eventually get around to covering God of War 3, because it's all recorded and ready to go. I just got to do some commentary for it, but I will be covering God of War 3 as my first God of War game for this channel. But I will be going back and replaying 1 or 2. I don't think I'll do the others, either because I find 2018 and Ragnarok way too boring to pursue, and I don't like the RPG elements. But I'm also not a big fan of Chains of Olympus on replays. Ghost of Sparta has a lot of shit enemies and tight corridor encounters that just make it unfun. Ascension I love more than most, but admittedly its combat is the worst. And yeah, that's pretty much it. 1 and 2 are definitely no pushovers for games. They're definitely some of the hardest on their highest difficulties to beat, but ultimately they're still the most fun. I enjoy them a lot. God of War 2 being my favourite of the franchise, and I still think God of War 2 is one of my favourite games ever. I haven't played it as much as 3, I don't think, but funny story is that I don't understand this section right here. Like, unless you're dodging to the side, you can't get up it. It's just weird. But God of War 2 means a lot to me because it was in 2010 where God of War 3 was being advertised on the radio for the first time. And I'd always known about God of War and heard of it, but I've never seen it properly played out. So, my dad actually went out to EB Games back when it was selling PS2 games, and he got his hands on God of War 1 and 2 for the PlayStation 2. And we spent a lot of nights and a lot of even days in the afternoons just playing it like crazy. Even to the point where I had to go back home and I borrowed it off of him. And I pretty much wore down the discs on both the games. I might still have the original PS2 copy of God of War 2 like we have, but I've got a few different copies of both games on PS2. And I think in one of my PS3s I've got files of them downloaded from the PlayStation Store because they re-released them with a bit of an HD upgrade. Doesn't make too much of a difference, but at least the game is still the same. And I just really wish that more, when a game was remastered or a game was re-released, they actually just followed along with that, kept the game exactly the same, no censorship, no messing around with the coding BS, just leave the game as it was, just make it look a little bit cleaner, and run a bit smoother. But yeah, that was when I was 13 years old, but when I was 14, I played God of War 2 for the millionth time, but I'm like, I wanted something a bit different. I want to change. I want to change things up a bit. So I decided to start God of War 2 on Titan difficulty, which is the highest difficulty in the game. And I didn't use YouTube a lot back at that time. I did a couple of years later, and then I got raw hooked on it. But yeah, all I had to go off of on how to beat God of War 2 on Titan was my own knowledge of the game and where I'd found all the chests. But even then at the time, I didn't find all the chests, but when I played Titan, I think it took me about 30 to 35 hours in total, but I did beat the game. And that was such a big moment for me, and a big part of why I love God of War 2 more than all the others. By the way, if you go through here in this portal, there's no enemies to fight, it just takes you to a secret little room where you can use a Darkness Terminal and a Terran statue. You want to do this, and if you die to Veilotl, just retry from checkpoint, and it won't set you in here, but you have to go through the portal again and get all your items restocked and everything. But as I was saying before, it was such a pivotal moment for me where I realised, holy shit, I've tackled a really tough game on a really high and bullshit difficulty. I can do this with just about everything else. And so I went back through all my library of games and looked at their highest difficulty levels, just tried to figure out what I wanted to do next. That's enough of that. Let's focus on the Veilotl boss fight right here. I kind of like the design for this thing, but he's just really annoying to deal with. Always spamming special attacks, always jumping, always going crazy. You pretty much have to use the mechanical arms here to interrupt him, because otherwise he'll keep jumping up in the air and swiping you, and because it's so fast you rarely have time to react, and you can't really catch him in the air. So yeah, just use the Wall Brew and the Iron Brew to give yourself some more defense and attack if you just want to get the fight over and done with. Otherwise, if you take your time, he's not that bad. Some of his attacks are really easy to dodge and get the perfect dodge on, but quite a few of them have weird hitboxes and are a little tough to deal with. You saw a transition before I started the fight. Yeah, I died quite a few times on this section, which was really infuriating. And on the second phase, he'll spit out dog enemies, which is just annoying as fuck. Wait, is it dog enemies? No. It's those zombie things, and a couple of them are spitters. It's like, isn't that just insane? This thing is flailing around like crazy. You need to be keeping your eye on it at all times because enemies will attack you from off screen, bosses, enemies with projectiles, everything. And yet, it wants to spawn in several enemies that can hit you from a distance and can swarm you and grab you and lock you in so that this thing can come and dive bomb you. It's not fair at all. Look at that damage though. I still had my War Brew buff where I got higher damage and it barely went away just as I used the ultimate, so I capitalized on all that damage. But it's worn off now, and so I'm just going to keep a distance while it flails around and just keep spamming it. Rest in piss, Veilotl. Absolutely terrible boss, hate it so much. And look at this, just explodes into a skeleton. It's kind of funny and kind of neat. I like it a lot, honestly. But while Ryu's execution kills are efficient, I won't lie, his execution against Veilotl, which isn't supposed to happen because he doesn't fight this boss, it's definitely unique and really fun. Alright, so he just goes through his portal here, has the end of the mission, and we'll move on to the Cetus chase and boss fight all in one mission. Big mistake if you ask me, it should have just been a boss fight.